In the 21st century, the opportunities and challenges of cross-cultural communication are an important dimension of everyday life.
Cross-cultural communication is it's extremely important in today's society. We increasingly find ourselves amongst people who are different from us, people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and oftentimes when we look at accomplishing daily tasks that we need to, cross-cultural understanding may mean the success or failure of being able to fulfill those. There are many dimensions of cross-cultural communication that are important, some that stand out more than others. For instance, different ways that people conceptualize time is an important factor, an important sort of area of difference that many people often confuse. Other issues such as power and how we relate to power and those who have more status or less than we do. Rules about how we act in public spaces and public arenas, things that are taboo, things that we can say or shouldn't say, and those kinds of rules in different cultures are all some of the key factors that are important in trying to understand these dimensions of cross-cultural communication.
In the remaining minutes, we will explore several differences in cross-cultural communication styles. So how and why do communication styles differ from culture to culture? There are two primary forms of socialization. Primary socialization is the process whereby people learn the attitudes, values, and actions appropriate to individuals as members of a particular culture. Anticipatory socialization refers to the processes of socialization in which a person rehearses for future positions, occupations, and social relationships.
When we talk about cultural differences, we're talking about values and norms and beliefs and the entire way of life of a particular culture. And we should think not only about differences between cultures, but also within cultures, across generations and across different time periods within the same culture. So we can think, for example, about gender socialization in the United States between 1950 and today and how different that is. And we can think about a variety of different ways in which people learn these kinds of values and norms and beliefs. So there are formal processes of intense socialization that children participate in, for example, in schooling. But we also think about the media, family, peer groups, and adults, of course, experience socialization throughout the life course as they enter new situations and learn new norms and new ways of life. So in the workplace, as they marry and have children, and every time they encounter a new situation, socialization occurs.
One of the universal dimensions of culture is time. It's been said that we all live time just a little bit differently. Monochronic time and polychronic time are two broad categories of time distinctions. The following scene illustrates one of the many forms of frustration that can stem from these differing conceptions of time.
It was very frustrating. She said that she would be there. She was supposed to drive me to my doctor's appointment. And I'd broken my leg, and of course I can't go anywhere. So I'm sitting there and I'm waiting. She's always late. I knew I was so crazy when I even asked her to come and do this for me. But I finally just bailed. I called a cab, went to the doctor without her. I walked in and they were giving me dirty looks. You know, you're supposed to be here 15 minutes ago. And I was I felt so bad. But whatever, they saw me even though I had to wait an extra 45 minutes because I missed my actual appointment. And then when she did show up to the house and she saw that I wasn't there, she was furious. And I was like, well, if anybody has the right to be furious, it should be me.
Yeah, how late was she?
She said that she got there, the way she timed it, she said that she got there about probably 5 minutes after I got in the cab. I got into the cab about 25 minutes after she was supposed to be there. Oh, so she was pretty late.
As you can see here, the student operating on monochronic time is frustrated by the missed appointment, while the professor's main concern is catching up on his relationship with an old friend he hasn't seen in a while, a characteristic of those operating on polychronic time.
When people say that everybody lives time just a little bit differently, what they mean is simply that different people from different cultures conceive of time in different ways, and often It's not something we think about, but it's expressed in our everyday routines, from work to how we interact with other people. Some people adhere to what we call clock time, where everything is scheduled and we have to be at certain places at a particular time, and it's important to adhere to that. While other people see maintaining relationships as more important than keeping a tight schedule. This area of time difference is often a source of misunderstanding when two people are operating on two different conceptualizations. So sometimes when someone doesn't show up on time, we may think that they're not valuing our time or that we take it personally, when they simply may be operating from a different framework.
Many alternatives to Western European clock time have abounded and are often confusing to many, as the following discussion illustrates.
Okay, so do you think it's cool to show up at 8? Like, let's say a party is stated for 8. Do you think it's cool to show up at 8?
No.
No?
My invitation says 8 o'clock? No, I would say show up at 9:30.
But why?
Why not?
But the invitation says 8. So, like,
Yes, but what they really mean is come at 9:30.
so then why don't you just say that?
Because if I said 9:30 on my invitation, I know inherently or embeddedly that nobody would show up till 11 o'clock.
Wow.
I
Well, I
just
don't
know that.
understand
It's one of those things that people call kind of like the CP time, color people's time. People just don't show up on time to things.
Like time, all cultures have rules that govern how we communicate in public. Rules are often unwritten and unconsciously followed by cultural insiders. Violations are taboo. Such taboos generally include dress codes, speech codes, and subject codes.
Different cultures have different rules about what is appropriate behavior in public spaces, primarily because public spaces are those places where a culture or a society or a group's values are really most prominently displayed. So we're talking about anything from what's appropriate dress to what kinds of things can be done in one area versus another, whether it's commercial or for play or what have you. For instance, in America, public nudity is not seen as appropriate behavior, and in fact, if you were to do that, you'd probably be arrested. In other places, at certain times, in say Brazil or maybe Amsterdam, for instance, not only is it acceptable, but if you don't join in, you're somehow seen as a prude. There are also times where there are certain topics that are seen as taboo, things that you don't discuss in public. For instance, in America, death is a taboo topic.
Yeah, my grandfather passed away last night. Oh. He had a bout of lung cancer, and last night he just let go. So
I'm sorry.
On the other hand, in places like Mexico, people not only talk about it often, but they have celebrations and rituals specifically tailored to that particular topic.
Like norms of public behavior, cultures differ by how direct or indirect they communicate. These kinds of messages are determined by how much context or background information is provided in a transmitted message, and are thus labeled high context or low context messages. Have you ever felt left out of a conversation? Like this example of a high context communication.
Oh my god, it was crazy. I swear, Dee was perking so hard at B-Bar the other night. It was absolutely insane. Like, she was just getting up with everyone, and oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, you know how it is, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you've seen her before? Yo, Dee, I can't believe it.
You know how it gets, yo.
Yeah.
Silly coos.
Oh wait, who's D? Who's D?
Oh, she's this girl that we know, we've known her for a while and stuff, and she's just
Who is she
crazy.
hooking up with?
Oh, I don't know. This time, whoa. It wasn't just one person. Yeah, that night got a little intense.
Or have you ever felt demeaned or burdened by too much information, as in the following example of low context communication?
So, like, the other day, we're up at the crib, hanging out, me and this dude Gabe, who I've known for like 3 years. I met him through this other dude, Andrew, who I used to live with. Fat Andrew, used to call him Yago. We found out who was named Yago because this other dude, Deronio, he was crazy cat. Crazy Deronio, he had a sword.
A high context culture, according to Hall, such as Asian cultures, Japan, China, Korea, tend to rely on the complexity of the event to convey most of the meaning. For example, who's involved, what their social status is, what the situation is, and how past experience or cultural rules might dictate appropriate behavior. These cultures tend to be very rooted in the past and tradition and slow to change, and there tends to be a strong orientation towards group belongingness, towards the use of ambiguity to minimize conflict, towards maintaining consensus as a sort of way of being in the society. A low context culture, for example, North American culture or other Western cultures, tends to rely more on the linguistic code explicitly, say what you mean. These cultures are less comfortable with ambiguity. They tend to embrace change more readily, for example, in the ways in which they structure their institutions in terms of plurality, or their embracing of technological advancements. And while they belong to a common culture, individualism is highly valued. In fact, in some situations, it's considered appropriate to assert your individuality. In fact, it's expected. So take an interview situation, for example, in which a North American is interviewing a Japanese. The Japanese person might be inclined to answer a question rather indirectly, that is, attending to a lot of the details of what he or she might think is important to the context of the question, which for North American, this might be perceived as irrelevant or incompetent or irritating.
Regardless of whether messages are direct or indirect, effective communication depends on recognizing and acknowledging power.
In thinking about the notion of authority and status in different cultures, it's important to recognize that what's valued in U.S. culture might not be the same in other cultures. For example, the U.S. values independence, access to individuals with authority, and this notion that we're all equal. Other cultures are more hierarchical, so it's important to be aware that what we might assume as the norm in our culture might be a transgression or seen as insulting in other cultures.
For some cultures, in certain situations, it's necessary to validate those with higher status. Face saving is a well-known example. Notice how students in the following scene diminish the expert character of their professor.
So we're discussing today about prejudices and stereotypes and so forth, and how those develop. And so I'll just start with one sort of common one, which is that most black people are very soft-spoken, quiet people.
Actually, I'm gonna have to disagree on that. I think some black people are actually pretty loud. Not all of them are so soft-spoken.
However, in the following scene, the student allows the professor to save face by deferring to the professor's expertise.
You are a professor, so I think we could defer to you for this maybe particular experience and, perhaps go with your opinion, even if a couple people have different experiences. I feel in general we should go with your opinion on that one.
There are also many ways to validate, challenge, or share power. We often see this in the context of complex negotiations. Many business professionals often cite the difficulty of this aspect of power that occurs between Americans and Japanese.
The notion of saving face is really powerful because it taps into notions of respect and how we are valued. Some cultures do not appreciate singling out individuals either for respect, for praise or for criticism, whereas in our culture we seem to function on a who is the best performer, who is the best salesperson, this kind of competitive spirit, and we thrive on it. Other cultures find that both humiliating and embarrassing, particularly cultures that value the group, working as one team, and not singling out individuals either for praise or for sanction, criticism.
Asian people cannot drive.
All Indian people are doctors.
Native Americans are casino-loving alcoholics.
These kinds of stereotypes and the prejudices they support are major barriers to cross-cultural understanding.
Stereotypes and prejudices are often used interchangeably, but they're a little bit different. Stereotypes are simply ways that we expect people to act or to be in certain situations. So we think certain people that are a member of a particular group will act in a particular way. Prejudice, on the other hand, is a negative prejudgment that we've already formed about a person who belongs to a certain group, regardless of whether we actually know that person or not. Both of these can be barriers to cross-cultural communication, especially prejudice, which simply closes us to trying to understand or learn more about people that are different from us. We simply have made up our mind already and don't want to consider new information. And stereotypes as well. Sometimes, people can be offended when we interact with them in ways that we think we should, or that they respond to us in ways that we think they should, and they do something differently.
Often prejudices develop because cultures adhere to different forms of logic, or lack thereof. Magic, myth, and rationality distinguish three such ways of organizing and understanding our experiences.
When we say that different people operate by different logics, we simply mean that different people use different methods to interpret or to understand their experiences. And so for some people, if we look at the same experience, say a disaster, people from one group might tend to ascribe the cause of that disaster to some supernatural force or as a result of some human action or intervention, whereas someone from a very rational understanding who relies on reason to interpret those experiences would simply say, here's the science. This happened, and then we had the disaster. It's important to understand how these things differ, because oftentimes if we don't realize that people are simply operating from different logics, we tend to want to say, oh, they're crazy, or they're misguided, or they simply are ignorant. And sometimes we make those judgments not realizing that they're simply operating from this different logical framework.
As you can see, effective cross-cultural communication is a complex challenge that necessitates understanding of the areas we have covered here, and many more. Why are these important to understand in our daily experiences that put us in contact with those with a different cultural background, and what are some of the ways we can go about increasing our level of understanding of these issues?
Languages are important for understanding conceptual differences between cultures as well as just for communicating. So languages convey meaning and conceptual ways of thinking in a way that are important to understand by speaking a language fluently.
One of the most important things that we can, I believe, learn about cross-cultural interactions and increase our level of cross-cultural understanding is to simply realize that just because people identify with a certain group doesn't mean that they will necessarily operate in those expected ways. So we have to treat every new encounter with every new individual differently and be open to understanding what it is that person is doing, how they think, how they behave. Obviously, there are a lot of things that can increase our level of understanding. Education, I think, is a big key, whether that's reading a book or traveling abroad. Any of those things, I believe, that expose us to different people and put us in those situations, I think will help our level of cross-cultural understanding.
If you're from a low context culture and you find yourself interacting in a high context cultural situation, it's very easy to make mistakes. It's very easy to misunderstand, particularly in the case where much of the information is conveyed through nonverbal communication, through proximity, through codes of conduct that aren't made explicit through language.
Many dimensions of cross-cultural differences can be seen as noise when we talk about the process of communication. When we think about that process, we have a sender and a receiver, a sender who sends a message, And the intent is for that receiver to receive that message as intended. As most of us know with TV or radio, sometimes there's things that get in the way of what we see or hear. We call that noise or static. In that same way, these areas of cultural differences can be noise. They're simply things that are a barrier to understanding if we don't understand where another person is coming from, what are some of the particular rules or norms of their cultural background, and some of those specifics. So those things can often be a barrier, and it's a bridge that must be gulfed, and those things are learned through our education and repeated interaction with people and with those who are different from us.